Live from Shore Manor Studios, this is Tales from a Small Town Journalist with Matt Shore.
Hi, guys. Thanks for checking out this episode of Tales from a Small Town Journalist, the podcast dedicated to all the weird and wonderful stories you are only going to hear about from reporters working in small communities just like yours. I'm Matt Shore, and I was one of those small town reporters for almost 10 years before I finally hung up my camera and my notepad. And in that time, I had some unique and interesting experiences working with the public. And I got to know a lot of other reporters who also had unique and interesting experiences working with the public. Before I go any further, I do want to make sure and mention that this is a listener-supported podcast supported by wonderful folks just like you. There are some great ways that you can show us some support. A new way to show support just this once. I hope you guys will forgive me for putting this out there, but we have recently launched the latest Kickstarter campaign for my comic book, Moby Dick, Back from the Deep. Issue number 4 is ready for print, and we could really use your support getting this thing going. So if you feel so inclined, head over to Kickstarter and check it out, Moby Dick Back from the Deep 4. Just, if you want to show some love on that, that'd be fantastic. You can also, another great way to show some support is just go visit my website and check out the bookstore there. We've got comic books, we've got novels, we've got children's books, we've got horror, science fiction, a little bit of everything. If you want to go over there and show us some financial love, that'd be awesome too. And last but most certainly not least, just, get the word out about us if you could, huh? Uh, Tell a friend, tell a neighbor, tell a loved one. Do it socially distanced. Keep it safe right now. We're not quite out of this pandemic yet. We are getting there, but not quite. So safely put the word out via Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, whatever social media platforms you use. Tell people about us. Let them know about this goofy little podcast and its goofy host. This episode, we're going to talk to David Shelton, a freelancer and a columnist for the Leaf-Chronicle newspaper. We've only talked to freelancers maybe one other time. I don't get to talk to them a whole lot, so it's interesting to hear from them. I think they've got a unique perspective when it comes to journalism in general, just what their contributions are, because it's different from those of us who worked just in the trenches full time, so to speak. So. Because when you're a freelancer, I think sometimes it's easy to believe that they just sort of come and go as they please, but that's not always the case. There are a lot of freelancers who it really is still their livelihood. So like they have to jump in and out of a bunch of different trenches. So it can be a high stress kind of lifestyle. So it's an interesting group and they've got interesting perspectives. And David Shelton is no exception. He's definitely got some interesting perspectives and some very very unique stories, all his own. Some great insights on journalism and just what it means for a community. So let's shift gears now. Let's go chat with David Shelton and see what he has to say. Okay, so thank you to David Shelton for joining me in this episode. David is a freelancer, columnist, and at one time a publisher of a magazine here in Clarksville. He contributes occasionally to the Leaf-Chronicle, and he's been doing that as long as I can remember. So a good long while, we'll just say. David, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. It's been a fun time. So thank you for inviting me.
Oh, no problem. You've got some great experiences, a longtime contributor to journalism here in Clarksville. So probably have some good experiences, I would guess, over that time, and an important voice for this community.
Well, it's a voice. I'll let somebody else decide if it's ever important or not. So.
Well, we were talking before we got started, so let's get back into that, just about the role journalists play when it comes to relaying events and news and stories as they happen in our community. So I don't want to take it away. You had some profound stuff that we were saying before we got started, so let's get back to that.
Oh, my goodness. So where do we start? I mean, just go do the Julie Andrews thing and go back to the very beginning. I won't sing. But one of my first experiences in dealing with anything with a big story was when I was working at the Leaf-Chronicle This was, I would say, the latter half of the latter half of the 90s. I was there for about 3 years, and I kind of got worked up from one department to another, and I ended up working in the design area because that's always been my first love as a graphic designer. But then one January, this little windstorm came through. You may have heard of it, the tornado of '99. I was an employee there, and I got the phone call that morning from my boss, Deborah Sutton, who is an amazing person. She was on the verge of tears. David, don't come in. We don't have a building. And we didn't. So there's a million stories that I could tell, but as far as first person type tales, it was really more during my time off than anything else. And then we had about a week off because they said, we don't have a building, but we're going to make newspapers, but we don't need what you do, but we're going to pay you anyway. That were Gannett back then. So I know those of us that have seen them since then, that might not have happened, but it was really the benefit of working for the largest newspaper corporation in the world, and they were truly behind us, and that was really amazing. That didn't change till a couple of years later. But I was off that time, and I got a phone call from my brother. And he had said, I really feel like I had this dream that people were praying and holding hands downtown, praying for the city after the tornado. And something in me just, when you know it's going to happen. I said, okay, watch me. And so I started making phone calls. And the first phone call that I made was to a gentleman by the name of Pastor Jimmy Terry. And I knew that if anything even had a hope and a prayer to get off the ground, especially related to prayer, he had to be involved. So, and I asked him what he thought. He said, David, I'm there. You tell me when, you tell me what, and I'm going to call so-and-so, 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 so-and-so. So within a half an hour, I couldn't have stopped if I wanted to. They said, well, let's do this Sunday. As it turned out to be Super Bowl Sunday, nobody cared. So by the time we had moved in, the tornado hit January 22nd, and the event that we had would be held on February 4th, just less than 2 weeks later. And it was kind of fun getting it going. We called the then pastor of First Baptist Church, and I won't name any names. And it was the location was important. So I called him. I said, hey, this is what's going on, and we'd like to see if we couldn't get power out here. So, well, I don't think the Lord leading us to do that at this time, the individual said, to which I replied, let me rephrase myself. You're going to have about 30 churches worth of people show up in your parking lot. Can we have power or what? They were very happy to help. And it was just a wonderful thing. And
it's all in the messaging sometimes.
Marvelous people. Pat Van Dyke was one of the at First Baptist was one of the most instrumental people and actually helped making everything happen. And he kind of came out and he saw all the folks. Said, all right, let's do this. And it was really great to get that kind of companionship and just a spirit of love and unity. I mean, nobody was asking for money. A couple of pastors probably wanted to, but we didn't need that. It was just such a wonderful, uplifting time. Mayor Johnny Piper had just been installed in office. He had just been sworn in just a few weeks before, as we all remember, and he was there. We had again just representation of over 30 churches, well over 400 people by the time I stopped counting. And it was the kind of thing that let me know that we love this town. We love the community. It's not so much trying just to have an event, but to really do what we can to reach out and to bring people together. And that's kind of been my life mission since then, just to help people understand whether it's about an LGBT issue or just some your basic things like racism, or even talking about something more complex that I've written a lot. So those are the kinds of things that really did make my journey kind of cool, and it was just so perfect because the way the Chronicle covered it, it was just all about every single person that was there in the spirit of unity and that sort of thing. I don't think I was even interviewed, but that's the amazing thing about it, is that the city came together in such a profound way.
That a tornado is something that I feel like maybe I came to Clarksville well after that happened, like over a decade later.
Wow.
But and I feel like as somebody who I may be among the people who came here after the fact who may know more about that tornado than anybody else who came here after the fact, because I have talked to so many people. When I was at the Leaf-Chronicle, of course, there was a lot of people there that still remembered it. And for
Mhm.
this podcast, actually, I've interviewed several, I've lost count, like 3 or 4, including you, who were there for it and remember it. And it's a fascinating story to hear because everybody has their own perspective on it, and this is a new one that's
Absolutely.
fascinating. But the one thing that does seem to hold true for all of them is just the resilience of a newspaper. Like the building was destroyed. I mean,
Yeah.
everything was wiped out. A bank is going to shut down for a while.
Whole roof just collapsed on top of itself.
Yeah, bank is going to shut down, like a grocery store is going to shut down and rebuild, but newspapers like, nope, we got a paper to put out. So let's go
Yeah.
relocate to another building and we're going to do this.
I remember well that Gene Washer saying, "We haven't missed a paper on my watch yet. It's not going to happen today."
Yep.
So I mean, and those crazy knuckleheads went into the collapsed building that literally had collapsed under itself, got into the old ad department where I worked, where we had all the negatives, and so they pulled all the ads out of this thing. They're falling on top of them as they get in, all to be able to put the ads in so that we could have a full paper. So I mean, it was an absolutely heroic effort on those guys, and I have nothing but respect for every single one of them. They really did become just journalistic heroes, and their stories are worth telling.
Yeah, it's amazing stuff because I've heard a few of those. One guy talked about like going into that building, even though like it was condemned and they weren't supposed to be there, but by golly, he had to get his computer, so he was
Yeah,
going in to get it.
get that crazy little those orange IMAX. I remember them well. We didn't have them back in the art department. We had older stuff, but yeah, so some of the writers got all the new stuff. That was really fun.
So, what are some other unique experiences that you've had? Because your perspective is a little different. You were over in advertising, doing a lot more graphic design than most of the people
Right.
that I've talked with.
Well, I mean, some of my favorite graphic design stories, I mean, they all involved things that kind of don't really matter, but until you start getting things together, and when I had left the Leaf-Chronicle by shortly, about almost a year after the tornado hit, and was offered a job at Johnston's and stayed there for 10 years as an artist and an illustrator. I was on cloud 9, but I was working for somebody else, and I had to eventually change that. So then I decided to start my own little magazine and got some people together to help make it. We put together a great team of writers and photographers. And then all of a sudden, around May of 2010, we got a little bit of rain and more rain, and it kept raining, and all of a sudden we had water all over the place. And it was probably one of the most unique and satisfying times of my entire career for 2 reasons. And one of those reasons is because at the time, my server was the only one that was working. The Leaf-Chronicle was down, another competing website was down. I think Clarksville Now was barely started, so they didn't really. I think they were still trying to publish articles from the Leaf-Chronicle before they kind of got told they can't do that. Just all of this stuff going on. So all of a sudden, the traffic on my site went from maybe 4,000 or 5,000 a day to 1 million. And people were finding that we were getting everything. So we had to move the server and that sort of thing. So during that time is when we said, okay, let's start covering this and start getting this ready for our print edition. And we went out, we got stories in Dover, we got stories in Erin, just some amazingly humbling photos of people just helping each other, throwing sandbags onto each other, and it's just one moment after another of again local heroes doing everything they can to help someone get out of their system. I got a chance to talk with Cindy Swearer, who is the owner of G's Pancake House back then, and she had seen everything kind of literally washed away, and there was a guy that had come in off the street to say, "Hey man, how can I help?" And this big guy just super smiley and big bulgy eyes, and just a great guy. He went in there and he had become such a part of what they were doing at G's. Cindy hired him. He became the manager of the restaurant. He passed away very tragically about 3 or 4 years ago. But I mean, those are the kinds of stories that I always love hearing about and telling, and seeing how Wendy's had been rebuilt and from the inside out, and you can see where the line is, kind of like you can see where the line is here, where the rain was, and that's the kind of humbling moment where, as a journalist, it's critical to get back and let the story tell itself. We don't have to embellish anything, and it was all about trying to say to not just make people feel anything, but let's help. Let's try to reach out, and I think we published that 10 years ago, and I have seen copies of that edition recently. I found one for myself here. It was the kind of thing we all took pride in it, and I showed it to one of my colleagues that we had back then, and he just shook his head and just shed a tear. Man, those were some amazing days, to just waiting to see where the water was gonna get over so we could get that perfect shot. I mean, that's the kind of scoop that a journalist lived for. And it's just the hope you get just the right moment, just the right that. And it's really the kind of thing that we can look back and say, you know what, that was a good time. We did some good. And I feel like that maybe we made a little bit of a difference. I don't know how, but sometimes people will see something that lifts them up a little bit. Sorry, I get emotional when I see stuff like that.
All right, not a problem at all.
That's the power of a good story, and you want to tell
exactly.
it, you want to get it out there.
Mm-hmm. Good story.
I can keep at it all night long. I know you've got kind of time.
No, it's fine. But you're right. A good story, good article, it can hit you and you can feel something from it. This is not journalism related, but you're making me think of my childhood. People have asked me sometimes, what's the most traumatic movie that you ever saw as a child? And they want me to give them some kind of a horror movie because I'm a horror movie fan. But I tell them the same thing every time. It was, without a doubt, Terminator 2. When Arnold goes into that fire at the end of that movie, I have never cried as hard as I did as a 10-year-old kid watching Arnold go into that fire.
Yes.
Yes. What is it? The readout says thermal overload, imminent shutdown, final command, thumbs up. But
hey, I think that's Arnold. I mean,
that might be what really pushed me to get into
Terminator became a drapery salesperson. So I laughed. I was probably the only person laughing for 20 minutes because that's what I do. So that's what. So yeah.
Well, but anyway,
So, movie
that's
nerd, I'm gonna pull up stuff like that out of thin air every time.
that's all right. It's a slight digression, but it illustrates what we're talking about. Just how a good story, if it's really impactful, really meaningful, it does pull an emotion out of you. And that can
Well,
happen. That can happen with a good movie and with just an article that tells a story that just hits home for you.
well, there's a movie Amistad by Steven Spielberg, and one of my favorite presidents of all time is John Quincy Adams, and he happened to have a featured part in that movie, and he asked one of the characters, "What's their story?" Well, they're from Africa. That's not a story. What's their story? Why are they here? Who are they? What's the purpose? What all of these things? That's what we need to know, not just simple dusty dates.
Mhm.
What's their story? And that's the thing that as a journalist, as a writer, as a storyteller, you just want to tell the story and beginning, middle, and end, and see who's still with you.
Yep, exactly. So one question that I did have, I've wondered since I've known you, is you are mostly known, probably at this point within the community, as a freelancer and a columnist. How did that come about?
Well, it was kind of a random moment. I had gotten to a point that I realized that two things were very, very true. One of those things is that I am gay, and two, it's desperately wrong, morally wrong, to oppress someone just because they're different. And it took me a long time to get to that point. And the reason that I wrote that first column back in July of 2004, it was an argument for same-sex marriage. And I sat down, I said, I actually called Elaine Megna just back in her days as the opinion page editor, and just always so stoic. I just adore her to pieces. And I said, I want to send you this. What do you think? She said, well, we usually reserve those for experts in this sort of thing. I said, well, I want to write an article about same-sex marriage and why it should happen because I'm gay and I'd like to eventually get married. Still single, by the way. Would like to change that. So if you know anybody else, anyway. So I should warn you about my bad humor someday. But anyway, and so I submitted the article, and my father, who is the Rush Limbaugh Republican and always has been. He said to call me up when he saw the article in the paper. Of course, he knew he knew it was coming. He said, "Huh, that was pretty good. You almost even convinced me." And that was a very, very gracious statement for him. And as time went on, I began to submit other articles on various other topics. Many of them did deal with the LGBT equality, and sometimes I had to just say something out of frustration, or why are we allowing this thing to continue because it's wrong? Why are we doing this because it's wrong? Why are we still putting people in jail because they're gay? That's wrong. I mean, that was 2003. So that just changed by then. So, and of course, some of the arguments against gay marriage was it would somehow lead to bestiality or something. And I basically said, if you can tell me how me being gay and married to the person that I love will lead to me having sex with my cat, I'd like you to tell me how that will happen. So sometimes you have to get the truth in with humor. Sometimes you just have to make a point that's outrageous. But I felt like I had a voice and I needed to use it. And sometimes that voice can be ridiculous. Sometimes it can be a little bit angry and upset. But my goal is always simple. I have an opinion, and here's why. You may not agree with me, but at least you'll understand why I feel this way. And if I can have that conversation, even on one-on-one with one reader at a time, then maybe we can do some good in our world. And that's what got me started.
Very, very good. I will say, for my own part, after reading several of your columns at this point. I've always appreciated them because, on one hand, they are very personal. It falls under the Ernest Hemingway description of what it means to be a writer, where he just said, "Oh, it's easy. All you do is slit your wrists and bleed on the paper." So there's
Oh,
like
wow. Okay. I try not to do that, but I get
well,
the
it's
point.
it's metaphorical, of course. He's referring to like how you bare your soul to
Sure.
complete strangers in a sense. And when I read your columns, that's what I see. They're very personal. And at the same time, even though you're arguing for something that clearly you would be very passionate about, it still comes across in a way that's very respectful and understanding of people who might not agree with you. So, for whatever my kudos is worth, there you have it.
Well, gosh. It's truly humbling that anyone even bothered to read what I think, what I bleed onto a paper. I do remember one thing a long time ago. I love the movie, Mr. Movie Buff, Inherit the Wind. And you have a character between, I think, Clarence Darrow and I cannot remember that journalist's name, but Hornbeck. She said, "Hornbeck, your problem is that every time you smash a noun next to a verb, you cause an explosion." I heard that and I said, "That's the kind of writer I want to be." So that's why when I write fiction, there's a lot of explosions. But and when I'm writing nonfiction or stories, I try to be explosive with some common sense, because apparently that's a superpower these days.
Yes, there'd be a whole other episode we could dedicate to that conversation. Well, I won't ask about any like nasty responses, because I'm sure anytime you say something personal with a hot topic issue like the ones we're talking about here, you get them. But have there been any responses to your columns that sort of stand out that were unique in some sense?
Hmm. I would get the occasional person who would read something, usually one of my LGBT columns, and someone would message me something hateful or just dumb. Usually it's just dumb.
We
This
don't have
sounds
to dig too many of those up.
sorry. It really, there are times when I wonder if I put myself into an echo chamber, because I generally get a lot of very positive responses. Um, and I would expect more negative responses, but the one thing I try not to be is hyperbolic. The hyperbole and the outrageous, it sells, but I'm the guy saying, can we use this? Can we use our heart? Can we unite the two? Is it possible to have intelligence and compassion, conviction and empathy? I believe that it is, and that's why I write the way that I do.
And it shows.
Well, thank you.
It's very good. All right, well, this has been a great conversation. We had a lot of great things, but I don't want to let you go if you have anything else to share. Any other experiences you want to let us know about?
Um, I would say let's save some of that for another time, because I have a bad habit of blathering and telling lots of stories, because I'm the Marlin from Finding Nemo, and where the guy walks into a bar, but it's not really a guy. It's the guy that does this and he says this, and oh, that reminds me of another story that does this. So yeah, I have to give me planned thinking, because otherwise I'm going to be all over the map and you're going to be banging your head on the keyboard.
That's all right. I will say I know all about Marlin. I know Finding Nemo probably verbatim at this point because of having two kids, four and one.
Amazing movie. Come on, don't blame that on the kids. Dude,
I don't blame them
amazing.
for watching it, because I had already watched it. I blame them for the fact that now I have probably watched it a dozen times a month, among other things.
And
Abs-
that's a problem. How? It's like me watching Star Wars every other week.
Oh, there you go.
That's gonna happen.
Yeah, I don't get to watch Star Wars anymore. Got to watch Finding Nemo and Tayo and
Oh yeah, you better get the Force need to be with those kids.
And maybe another year, we'll see. 5 years old is about when I think my dad brought home Star Wars on a
I was
VHS, if
in
anybody remembers those.
1977. I was 6 years old. And it was all, and the way that my dad got me into that movie theater, because I was but Dad, I'm watching Star Trek. It's just like Star Trek. Come on, let's go.
Now we're getting into another, speaking of heated conversations, Star Trek,
Well,
Star
I
Wars.
was 6 and I didn't care. I wanted to see space battles, and that's exactly what I got. But what my father didn't know that he was going to get is a little Luke Skywalker for the next 12 years.
Yep, that was me. Yeah, for
Yeah.
right up through high school, big into
I don't know.
Star Wars.
You strike me more the Han Solo type.
Me, Han Solo. No, really, I always related to
I
Luke
read your
because,
work.
huh? Well, I related to Luke's idealism, I think. I always appreciated that. And Han was just so cynical. As a teenager, I was much more Han Solo, but I think once I got through college, I started appreciating Luke once again. So,
Well, at least we both know that Han shot first.
yes, Han shot first. And what I used to always tell people in high school when they would insist that the biggest, baddest dude in all the galaxy was Darth Vader, I always told them, look, Luke beat him like convincingly. So I'm sorry. It's like it wasn't one of those like almost beat him or whatever, or like a DQ like on WrestleMania. Vader was down and Luke only stopped because he didn't want to make that final turn. So it was over.
And then Palpatine got thrown down the tube in the most epic flatulence I have heard in cinematic history.
Oh, that's a great quote to end
Gotta
this
watch
on.
that.
Star Wars ending with epic flatulence.
Pull my finger.
Yeah. Well, that was great. Well, thanks so much. Yes, we will definitely have to do this again. If you've got some more stories, I definitely want to hear them.
Thank you for this. I want to hear some of your stories next time. So,
Okay, maybe we can get into that. I've probably got some wild ones to tell. Like the time I saw police and veterinarians chasing a cow throughout the downtown area. I've told that story so many times, though.
sounds bullish.
Oh, well, I'll tell that story again, perhaps next.
Open-minded with me, so that's that. So that's the groaner, and I'm going to stop talking.
That's all right. Yeah, we can get in, I can get into that story again next time. But hey, yes, one more time, thank you again, and we'll close things out on that note. I appreciate it. All right, thank you so much, David, for joining me. That was a fantastic conversation. It was fun, it was humorous, and it was personal. So I appreciate you taking the time to chat with me. We definitely will have to do that again sometime because I'm sure you've got more stories to tell, and I definitely want to hear them and let as many people as I can enjoy them right along with me. Uh, One little plug I want to make on David's behalf that we neglected to do during this interview. David does have a book out, a fictional novel, science fiction called Unification. I'm going to pull up the title here on my phone. Unification: Rise of the Thunderblade. You can find that on Amazon, but if you happen to be in Clarksville, then swing by Huda Bam Book Traders. They actually have copies there. So show some love for a local business and a local writer. And while you're there, they've got some of my books too. If you want to pick one of those up, by all means. But anyway, uh, thank you again, David. That was really good. And as we wrap things up, this is where we shift over into the cheap plugs segment. So once again, I'm going to remind you, of course, about my Kickstarter. There is a Kickstarter right now going on for Moby Dick Back from the Deep #4. This is the penultimate issue. There will only be one more issue after this. It all ends. So this will be your final chance to be drawn into upcoming pages as a zombie. This is a unique feature that I've offered people for previous Kickstarters to get drawn into the comic, which is something a lot of people have done. We added a twist, though. You can become a zombified member of Ahab's crew in the upcoming pages of the webcomic. So if that interests you, swing over to Kickstarter and check out Moby Dick Back from the Deep, or excuse me, #4. Moby Dick Back from the Deep #4. Got a little tongue tied there. Or, if you're following me on social media, you can find it. I'll be sharing links there as well. Which brings us to the next part of the cheap plugs. This podcast is a part of Shore Manor Studio on YouTube, where all of our episodes are now stored in their entirety and with video. So look us up there or go to tinyurl.com/Shore Manor YouTube. You can also sign up for our official newsletter at tinyurl.com/Shore Manor Newsletter. And you can look up our official website at www.mattshore.net, where you'll find this and previous episodes archived. Just click on the podcast link at the top of the page. And speaking of those social media links I mentioned just a moment ago, if you would like to connect with me directly, you can find me on Twitter at @TheMattShore and on Instagram at The Shore. Or if you're old school and you want to send something via email, you can reach me at mattshore@hotmail.com. So thanks again for checking out this episode. Thank you to David for joining me. And as we close out, I'll just say once again, keep listening and keep reading. Thanks.